On October 17, 2024, Chinese President Xi Jinping visited a brigade of the Chinese Army's rocket force. During the visit, Xi asked the forces responsible for conventional and nuclear missiles to comprehensively enhance their training and preparations for war. This visit came days after the massive maneuvers carried out by the Chinese army around Taiwan on October 14th. All branches of the Chinese army carried out a massive military maneuver around Taiwan Island, in which about 153 aircraft and 26 warships participated in addition to an aircraft. At the same time, the Chinese Coast Guard forces, which operate separately from the army, carried out patrols around Taiwan Island and stated that these patrols are a practical measure to control Taiwan Island. According to the law based on the principle of One China, these Chinese movements were naturally subject to monitoring by Taiwan. And the United States is currently in a state of alert and anticipation of the possibility of China forcibly annexing Taiwan. All of China's movements suggest that it is not only preparing to annex Taiwan, but also more. In preparation by the United States for a possible war between the two parties, if America decides to intervene and defend Taiwan militarily, the question now is, what would the war between the United States and China look like? And to what extent are both parties prepared for it, whether militarily or economically? And is it possible for China to exploit the United States' preoccupation with supporting Ukraine and Israel, and launch a preemptive attack not only on Taiwan, but also on American territory? This is part of what we will chat about together in today's episode.
Of knowledge.
Plus, in late January 2023, the American NBC News published details of an internal memo that General Mike had sent. The head of the Air Transport Command at the time insulted the officers under his command in this memoir. From here, he wrote a phrase in which he said, "I hope I'm wrong, but my friend tells me that we will go to war with China in 2025. If the American general's predictions are correct, this means that a war between China and the United States could happen within a few months, and this automatically leads us to ask about the readiness of both parties too." Let's go into this war, but before we look at the preparations, it is necessary to first know what this war might look like if it took place on April 19, 2023. The Center for a New American Security, in cooperation with a number of members of the US Congress, created a game or simulation in which it tried to predict the strategic decisions that the United States and China could take in the event of a conflict breaking out between them. In the simulation or experimental exercise, there were two teams: a blue team that made decisions on behalf of the United States, and a red team that played the role of China. This means that the members of this team were thinking as if they were in the place of the Chinese decision maker. The war scenario will begin in 2027 based on a political crisis that will occur between China and Taiwan. At that time, China will ask Taiwan to enter into immediate negotiations to arrange the annexation process. The Taiwanese will refuse. The Chinese will not mobilize for the invasion. And from here the war will begin, in which the United States will participate in defense of Taiwan in the first 3 days of the war. The blue team that represents America chose a military strategy in which the American air, land and naval forces participate in an attempt to exhaust the Chinese fleet that will take Taiwan. Within this strategy, Chinese military targets will also be struck to ensure reducing the risks that the American forces that will participate in the military operations will be exposed. This is with regard to the military aspect. On the economic side, the blue team initially chose to impose sanctions on Chinese state-owned banks and threatened to impose more sanctions if China refused to back down from the invasion. On the other hand, the Red Team's military strategy was to launch massive air and missile strikes against Taiwan and against US military bases in the region. The Chinese military will carry out a sea crossing and airdrop operation in parallel with an air attack on Taiwan in exchange for US economic sanctions. The Red Team will first give up its holdings of US Treasury bonds in order to destabilize the US bond market, and at the same time impose a ban on the export of consumer electronics to the United States. After the end of the first 3 days of the war, the situation between the two parties will be as follows. The Red Team, representing China, will have succeeded in establishing a base on Taiwanese territory that includes more than 30,000 soldiers, but after suffering heavy losses. At the same time, the Blue Team will suffer losses due to the Red Team's attack on the American bases, but in light of the fact that the American forces are widely spread and distributed, most of them survived the Chinese attacks. In the second step, which covers the 3 days after them, the estimates say that the Blue Team will continue to implement its military strategy and will rise from its economic pressure on China. In return, the Red Team will insist on the invasion and will also exert economic pressure on the American side, but this time the pressure will be through a ban on the export of materials used in the manufacture of American weapons. At the end of the first week of fighting, the military losses for both sides will be as follows. 10 American bases will be exposed to attack from before China, and the US military will have lost 90 aircraft, in addition to losing 2 attack submarines and 1 American aircraft carrier damaged by Chinese attacks. On the other side, the Red Team, representing China, is expected to have lost more than 150 aircraft, 15 submarines and more than 100 ships, in addition to an aircraft carrier. But at the same time, China will have succeeded in landing about 50,000 troops on Taiwan. This simulation only covered the first 6 days of a potential war between China and the United States. According to those who made it at the end of those 6 days, neither the Red Team nor the Blue Team would be in a position to declare victory, and there is no clear end to this conflict in sight. If it appears that both parties are unable to achieve a quick victory, their hatred towards getting involved in a long and very costly war of attrition will emerge, and from here the importance of defense industries for both parties becomes apparent, because defense industries are what will enable each party to continue the attack until the other party is broken or surrenders. And defense industries, by the way, are needed. It will start as soon as the war begins, especially since it is expected that the two sides will rely in the first days of the fighting on long-range attacks using missiles. In the confrontation scenario that we explained now, the expectations of the Center for New American Security say that the Blue Team's stock of long-range offensive naval weapons will run out in 3 days, and its stock of long-range ground offensive weapons will be depleted within a period ranging from 10 to 14 days from the start of the fighting. In contrast, the Red Team's huge stockpile of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles will also join within a short period, and after both sides finish their stockpiles of missiles in the first days of the fighting, they will fly away. Automatically in a grinding war of attrition in which the American and Chinese defense industries will play a decisive role, which of them is more capable of supporting its country's army, the American defense industries or the Chinese defense industries? At the beginning, if we look at the issue from the perspective of military spending, then we find that the American army is the richest army in the world and the one that spends the most. Absolutely, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Peace in American military spending in 2020 reached $916 billion, which is more than 3 times the Chinese military spending, which reached about $296 billion during the same year. From the point of view of some, This huge disparity in the size of defense spending between the two parties gives the United States an advantage over China. It concerns the ability to support the Army's operations and ensure its continued access to its needs of ammunition and weapons. When this point is combined with the economic difficulties that the Chinese economy has been suffering from recently, such as increasing unemployment among young people, the high volume of government debt and weak economic growth, we find the balance tipping towards the United States, the owner of the largest and strongest economy in the world. But this is a theory. In practice, or on the ground, China has a very large defense industrial base that is superior in many aspects to its American perspective. This base is responsible for producing and developing weapons and systems designed to deter the United States from entering into a direct conflict with China. In the event that deterrence fails and the two countries clash, America is directly with China. So in this case, the role of the Chinese defense industrial base will be to provide the Chinese army with weapons that guarantee its victory from the conflict. The remarkable thing is that the huge development witnessed by the Chinese defense industries only happened in the last decade or so. Today, China has the ability to produce weapons and ammunition in huge quantities that equal and sometimes exceed the ability of its American opponent. For example, China is currently the world's largest shipbuilder, and America is not only behind it in this field, but it is not even considered a competitor. China's production capacity in the field of ships is equivalent to more than 230 times the capacity of the United States in the same field, according to estimates by the US Navy. One shipyard in China is like the shipyard on Changqing Island, located on the east coast of China, has a production capacity greater than the production capacity of all American shipyards combined. More important than quantity is quality. The Chinese manufacture almost everything related to naval weapons, including engines, weapons, electronic systems, submarines, and surface warships in the 10 years. The Chinese have recently built a large number of frigates and destroyers, in addition to 2 aircraft carriers, Shandong and Fujian. For this reason, China today possesses the largest navy in the world. The American naval defense industries are more advanced than their Chinese counterparts in terms of the capabilities of the various naval vessels and the capabilities of the systems and weapons on them, but the Chinese, in return, have a very important advantage in this context. It is represented in that they can, if they wish, increase their ability to produce warships and compensate for their losses much faster than the United States, and this speed factor will be very important and decisive in the context of any war of attrition between the two parties. The same thing applies to the Air Force. The United States possesses the largest and most advanced air fleet in the world, which includes advanced 5th-generation fighter aircraft such as the F-22 and F-35. There is no debate about this, but China has succeeded in recent years in narrowing the huge gap that existed between it and the United States in terms of air weapons. This is thanks to its advanced industrial base, at the heart of which is the manufacturing company Chinese Airlines. It is considered the largest. The military aircraft manufacturing company in China produces for the Chinese almost all fighters, transport aircraft, training aircraft, bombers, reconnaissance aircraft, drones, and helicopters. By 2023, China had been able to produce more than 2,000 4th and 5th generation fighter aircraft, which is more than double the number of fighter aircraft that were in service in the Chinese Army in 2017, which numbered close to 800 aircraft. The Americans are still in the lead in terms of the number of fighters. They had more than 3,350 fighters of the 4th and 5th generation. But the Chinese are not far from this number, first and second. If they continue to manufacture fighters at the same pace, they will be able to build a fleet whose size will soon exceed the US fleet. In the same context, the Chinese are focusing on expanding their capabilities in the missile industry, which is mainly carried out by 2 companies, China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, and China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation.
Both companies have significantly expanded their production facilities in recent years, with the aim of increasing China's stockpiles of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and hypersonic missiles of various origins, some of which are capable of reaching American territory. The Chinese have not forgotten the equipment and weapons used by the Chinese ground forces, which are considered the largest of their kind in the world. Chinese companies in recent years have increased their production of tanks, armored personnel carriers, assault vehicles, air defense systems, and artillery systems. Here, it is necessary to take into account the huge and increasing volume of production of various weapons and ammunition. It is not the only driver of the Chinese military renaissance, but the Chinese have made significant improvements and leaps in parallel with this. The research is concerned with the development of their defense industry, and this has allowed the Chinese army to possess, for the first time, systems and weapons such as aircraft capable of vertical takeoff from aircraft carriers, supersonic aircraft, and advanced missile defense systems, in addition to electronic systems that enable the army to manage networks, command, control, and coordination between the various weapons in the battle, in addition to their development of satellites that enable it to spy and monitor in an unprecedented way in its history. In December 2023, China launched a satellite called Yugen-41. According to American estimates, this satellite can see and track the movements of objects the size of a car all over the world. That is, before the Chinese launched this satellite, American General James Rainey warned that the ability to hide, which was a basic element in how fighting the U.S. Army, has become impossible now. In fact, it is not known whether the general had an idea about the capabilities of the Yugen-41 before it was launched or not. But what is certain is that the Chinese today have become able to closely monitor the movements of the U.S. Army in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. The Chinese currently own 5 defense companies among the list of the 12 largest companies in the world in terms of